Greetings friends, it's Victor here and welcome to another video. As of this past week, I am officially 1 month on low-dose testosterone, and so today I just want to talk about a few of the changes that I've seen within this first month on low-dose T. But before we get started, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and go ahead and hit the like button as well. Thanks. I'm going to talk about the changes that I've seen in myself on low-dose testosterone over the course of the past month, but I'm probably going to talk about my voice a great deal more than everything else, so I'm going to talk about my voice at the end just because I have the most to say about that, and I'm going to talk about everything else kind of like here at the beginning. So if you're most interested in the voice, then I'll leave a timestamp in the description and you can skip to the end on that. Okay, so we're going to talk about the small things first. When I posted my 1 week on testosterone update video, I mentioned my body odor and pee smelling different, as well as just generally feeling hot, especially when I work out. So those are kind of the main, like, small differences, I guess, that, like, really have no impact on my life at all whatsoever. It was just interesting to note. Those have persisted. In addition to that, over the course of the past couple weeks, I have noticed that, in general, my energy levels are much more consistent throughout the day, where, you know, I wake up feeling just as energetic as I do at like 2 p.m, like when usually I would start feeling sleepy or tired, or like I didn't have energy to keep going throughout the day and needed a nap. And so that's a little bit interesting, because I've heard people say that, you know, they generally feel more energetic, and I didn't think that was a thing, but that's definitely the case for me. Additionally, I've started getting acne, which is kind of horrible. Like, not proper acne where it's like lots of acne everywhere, but like they're like little red spots and like things, especially on my forehead, that was not normal for me. When I had first puberty, I wasn't a terribly like acne inflicted person, and so I'm not really expecting to / hoping that I'm not going to be like horribly impacted by acne this go around, but it definitely has been more present than it was for the past several years since I've been out of first puberty. By and large, there's been no change in hair, head hair, facial hair, body hair, otherwise. For the most part, hair has been all exactly the same, with the exception of like one random thick, dark hair that was like very, very short, that was like above my knee on my leg. I don't grow hair there, I've never grown hair there, and so like, or at least like noticeable hair, and so there was just like this one random hair that was a little bit strange. But other than that, that's the only abnormal hair growth that I've seen so far. In general, I'm not like a terribly hairy person. None of the men in my family are terribly hairy, and so I'm not really expecting to like come out of this being like, I don't know, like a bear or anything. Take that for what it's worth. Another physical change that might be noteworthy is that the little guy downstairs is like starting to get less little. I'm not really gonna go into any detail there because frankly it's none of anyone's business, except for my own, but I'm kind of excited about that, and it is like noticeably bigger than before, which is very nice. So yeah, take that for what it's worth. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you probably don't need to know what I'm talking about. I would also like to note that I have had no change in appetite or in performance at the gym, so that's a little bit abnormal, I think, because I hear a lot of people say when they start testosterone, like immediately their appetite goes like way up and they're eating like so much more food. And I've just been someone who generally is an active person and who always eats a lot of food. And so I haven't really noticed any substantial changes with that. Along with that, I haven't really noticed any substantial changes in the gym. It's not like I all of a sudden can lift like way more than I was. I'm basically tracking with where I had been lifting for a while, and I'm someone who like, especially pre-testosterone, like I would plateau really hard, and like if I stopped working out for months or years and then started up again, like basically the max that I was doing after an extended period of time working out, like I would hit a max and I would just not really be able to break past that plateau. And so I'm hoping that testosterone is going to help me to like break past that plateau at some point. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but so far I have not seen any changes there. Next, I would like to talk about emotions. The first several weeks that I had started low-dose T, I was extremely like agitated and irritable and aggressive for like the first couple weeks, to the point where like at work, someone would ask me like a totally innocent question and I would be really, really angry about it for some reason, and would kind of like not be able to like pass it off like as not being angry as easily as before. I suppose in general, I am kind of like an irritable, grumpy person, but like, I don't know, maybe that's my perception of myself, but I feel like agitated a lot at work and elsewhere in life. But I feel like before I could, for the most part, as long as I had enough sleep, I could like control that and rein it in. Whereas the first couple weeks I was on T, I had difficulty doing that. To be fair, those first couple weeks, I also was not getting very good sleep because the nature of my job is that sometimes I get called in the middle of the night, and those first couple weeks I was just getting called like every other night in the middle of the night, and I take a really long time to fall asleep if I've been like interrupted and woken up like in the middle of the night. And so that may have had something to do with it, and because it was related to work, I was probably a little bit ticked off at work in the first place because they're the reason that I didn't get great sleep. So anyway, long story short, it could have been something else, but it did happen to coincide with the first couple weeks that I was on T. Since then, for the last couple weeks, I have not had that problem. I have been very emotionally stable, very emotionally even, and really have not had like that same level of like agitation and anger. So maybe my body was just like getting adjusted to T, or maybe it was just an external factor that had nothing to do with T that was making me like a little bit grumpy. But yeah, it's been totally fine for the past couple weeks, and I've generally been a pretty pleasant person at work and elsewhere, where, you know, I can interface with people and, you know, be nice and kind and, you know, for the most part, have an easy user interface. I would say in general with emotions, since I've been on T, I have felt pretty like steady and pretty even, where, you know, I don't really have like, I don't know, these ups and downs quite as much. And I didn't really have that a lot before. Like in general before I was pretty even, but now I feel a sense of like internal calmness and fortitude and sturdiness that I won't say was absent before, but just that I feel it more now, and that might be coming from the confidence that kind of T is giving me just psychologically, I guess, or it might be an actual chemical thing. I honestly have no idea, just my personal observations. Finally, I would like to talk about my voice. I'm going to speak specifically to my speaking voice and then specifically to my singing voice because they are different in some ways. With my speaking voice, I don't feel like my actual range and register have shifted, but I do think that is much easier now to speak more at the bottom of my register, where I feel like that's kind of a more natural place for my voice to sit, and I can project very well without a whole lot of effort, without a whole lot of strain, and it's actually kind of nice. It feels really good, and like I feel like when I speak, I feel like this resonance that I could get sometimes before, but now I just don't have to think about it. Whereas before I would have to actively consciously be choosing to speak in a low register and to project, whereas now it just kind of happens, and that's kind of nice. And it also makes me feel more comfortable with speaking in a higher register because it doesn't feel as weird to me, I guess. I don't know. But in terms of the actual range, my actual range for speaking voice has not changed really at all. It's more just that it's more comfortable to be at the bottom. For my singing voice, this is really, really interesting. So my actual range until this past week, and I'll talk about this past week after I talk about what the rest of the month has been like, my actual range had not changed. So again, similar to my speaking voice, I could sing exactly the same notes that I could before, but when I sang the notes at the bottom of my register, I was able to project them better, and they sounded like full notes, which was really exciting to me. Pre-T, my range kind of bottomed out at like the D, maybe the D flat below middle C, so like it was pretty deep, but that D flat, D, E flat, for the most part, they were not really a full, rich sound. Like, I could sing them, I could make the sound, and I had figured out a way to, like, make it project a little bit better, but I really only had one tone with those notes. Or two tones. I had a really breathy tone, and then I had, like, a very, like, focused nasal tone that really came out still kind of breathy, whereas now I have a lot more flexibility with how I sing those notes at the bottom of my range, to where those bottom notes, I have the same flexibility as all the other notes in the rest of my range. So that's really, really exciting to be able to really feel like I can start using those notes beyond just kind of breathing them. Now this past week, I was able to actually sing a C below middle C, which is like the lowest note that I have ever sung. Like before, I could like kind of breathe it if I was sick and like kind of get it out like on pitch, but like it wasn't a good sound and I couldn't control it like at all. Whereas this past week, I was able to sing a C and I had more of the resonance and I could control it a little bit better. So that was a really exciting development that like this is the first step, I think, or the first actual change in my range where I can sing a lower note than I ever could before. So that's pretty exciting, and that was week 4 or 4.5 after being on low dose T. Now in terms of my higher register, I noticed after the first 2 weeks of being on low dose T that when I sang in my falsetto or my head voice or whatever you want to call it, it sounded a little bit different. When I was pre-T and I would sing in my head voice, it sounded very like bell-like and very round, and like it was a pretty sound, but it was a very like choir sound, and I really didn't have any ability to put any resonance in it. I mean, it was resonant, but I didn't have the ability to put that like nasal resonance in it to like really project in like a Broadway kind of style, if that makes sense. So all in all, I had like a pretty limited ability to apply my head voice to different genres just because like it always came out sounding like a choir sound. After being 2 weeks on T, I started singing in my falsetto, and it was really interesting because it was still, for the most part, it felt the same, right? For the most part. And it sounded mostly the same, but I could start to hear like more texture in the tone. Before pre-T head voice, it would be like very like round and very much like a pure kind of sound. Whereas 2 weeks into low dose T, I would sing in my falsetto and there was like more richness and texture, and I could like, there were more overtones. It was very, very interesting to kind of experience that. And I was not at a point where I could really manipulate and control the tone or the timbre or the texture that well at all. But I could feel that there was increasing potential for it, if that makes any sense. Now for the middle range, I am talking like, you know, a range that's kind of just below middle C to like maybe up to like the A or B above middle C. That's my typical like comfortable chest voice. I can even get like an alto belty kind of sound pre-T. That range for the most part has stayed the same, but again, the texture and timbre have started to slowly shift. Before, I felt like I could get a really good tenory sound using that range, using kind of like an alto belt kind of technique, where I felt like I could really like go for it and get more or less like a rich, shouty, tenory sound. But over the course of the past month, I've noticed that that tenor sound comes a lot more naturally, and that I have to focus on it less, and that it feels, again, like there's more texture in the sound. It feels like more punk rock kind of sounding, if that makes sense, rather than like Broadway belt. This is all very difficult to describe, and I'm just now realizing that I'm probably not really describing this well at all. The range itself for my chest voice has not diminished, so I can still, for the most part, hit all of the top high notes that I could in my chest voice before starting T. It just has more of a thick texture to it rather than like a not thick texture. I don't even know how to describe that. I am hoping that if I continue to sing on it and continue to like utilize that range, that I won't lose it, if that makes sense, but it's quite possible that I will lose it. So I'm just kind of emotionally preparing myself to not be able to sing in that like chest range anymore. In terms of singing, I think it's been very difficult to have like an even tone. I feel like I've always kind of had sloppy technique when I'm not focusing on it in terms of like scooping into and out of notes, which if I concentrate on it, I can make it work and it's fine. But I just like am naturally a little bit lazy with my notes and things. Since starting T, it's been more difficult, even if I am focusing on those things, to really have this consistent, even tone across them all and to not scoop into and out of notes. So I think that's just kind of a consequence of the developing voice and of the changing voice. I think a lot of like teenage boys going through puberty kind of experience that as well. I've had a few like voice cracks and voice breaks when I'm speaking or when I'm singing, but nothing too major, and only if I'm like singing at or speaking at the extremes in my range for the most part. When I'm like kind of in the middle of my range, like right here, not really a big deal. All right, I think that's all I have for y'all in the way of changes in the first month on Low Dose Tea. Overall, it has been an absolutely wonderful experience. I've really truly appreciated the changes that Low Dose Tea has brought. I think I was really worried for a long time that I wouldn't like the changes that tea would bring, but so far that has not been the case at all, and that has not been my experience. Everything that has come in the way of changes have been welcomed and appreciated, and we're just gonna take this a day at a time, a month at a time, and see how long I'm going to stay on tea, because I don't know that I'm going to stay on it for the rest of my life. I also don't know that I'm not going to stay on it for the rest of my life. So, you know, as long as I'm enjoying and appreciating the changes that are coming, then I'll stay on it. So yeah, that's where we are, and stay tuned for an update in the coming months for where we are with that. All right, that's all I have for today. Please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already, or maybe hitting the notification bell, or, you know, any of those other things that, you know, people are supposed to do when they watch videos. I don't know. Anyhow, I hope you have a wonderful day, and until next time.